Hey everyone, what's up? How's it going? This is Finite MTG, and today I will be bringing you all the most recent Supreme Gold draft I did on Magic Online this season. So, if you've heard me talk about Supreme Draft before, you probably know I'm not a big fan of it. Not least because, in my opinion, it's not really a draft because it's something that doesn't involve other players or reading signals. And in that sense, it's almost like a weird kind of like sequential sealed thing. I don't hate sealed, but it's just strange to me to market something as a draft that feels very far from that. Anyway, uh, so this format, despite not being my first choice, bears some resemblance to Chaos Draft. And as I am continually running my own Chaos Drafts on Magic Online, it's always nice to get a break and have the client put up Chaos Drafts or something in the ballpark of their own, um, so I don't have to do that organizational legwork. Anyway, without further ado, let's dive into the picks. This draft was a sweet one. So, one of the things about this format is you really are incentivized to be five color. I mentioned that this is Supreme Gold, and that means that they opted for only sets with a multicolor or gold theme in them. And because you're not drafting with other people, it's not like lands are not going to be appearing in the packs, or like the best gold cards aren't going to be there, which means you can just basically play a five color pile every single time. No one can stop you. You can pretty much always guarantee getting enough fixing. And in that sense, it's really uninteresting. But the previous day, the day before I drafted this, I'd gotten 3 trophies on the day, just playing five color soup. So I went into this with that same mentality. Um, so Nimble Larcenist is an exciting card. It's kind of like a newer version of Sin Collector, but you don't just hit instants or sorceries. You can also hit an artifact with this card. Of course, it does have flying as well, and the card gets exiled. But the reason that this is such a nice effect in this format is because there are really just a few kinds of cards you want. You want bombs, you want removal, you want fixing, and I guess that fourth kind of card would be card advantage. So even something like Mind Rot ends up being pretty solid in this format. Nimble Larcenist as a reasonable body with a nice disruptive part attached to it is very solid. Um, and since there is a Tri-Land of sorts in the pack here, the Naya kind of new version of the Panoramas, if you will, we are going to be taking that as well with this plan to just say, well, the Naya land gets us red and green mana, which is not part of our plan with the Larcenist, but more likely than not, we're going to end up five colors, and these will both be very nice inclusions in the deck. Alright, pack 2, pick 1. So, one of the things that really hurts about this format, unlike Chaos proper, in my opinion, is when you do like traditional Chaos drafts, you are not just looking at the new packs for playables. Granted, the new packs pretty consistently contain a higher number of playables, but some of the best cards in the whole draft are in the old packs. Um, Whereas in this format, it's pretty consistent, unfortunately, that, like, for instance, Return to Ravnica packs are pretty weak. So looking through this one, there's really not much going on. One of the gold cards in the pack that's decent is like this Liev Sky Knight, but this thing is like pretty frail. It's a 3/1 flyer. It's not a terrible body for regular formats, and that ability is nice too. But in this format, a lot of the time, your opponent won't even have a non-land permanent in play for you to detain. So it's kind of just a 3/1 flyer that's hard to cast. Um, Sometimes it's a bit better. And we already foreshadowed the other card that we're interested in here. It might not look particularly exciting, but Mind Rot in this format is actually quite solid. It's pretty hard to accrue card advantage through this selection of packs. And Mind Rot can be potentially a way to answer one bomb, if you're lucky, multiple bombs, if not just mess up your opponent's mana, take away an interactive card. It's actually pretty solid in the format. Alright, so pack 3, pick 1. Once again, we are really lacking bombs. Polluted Delta is in the pack as a form of fixing, and it is a decent one, so we will take that, no complaints. Something interesting here is we do have incremental growth in the pack, and this card in traditional limited, even probably most cubes and definitely in Chaos Draft, is quite strong. But notice that this is not a card that says up to, which means if you control only one creature, good luck playing this to any kind of positive effect. Would you like to pump multiple of your opponent's creatures, or maybe you can't even cast it? And a lot of the time in this format, games end with only one threat on the table. So incremental growth, while it looks powerful, is really just a card that's going to rot in hand. On the other hand, Death Frenzy, this card, it's okay if you're trading it 1 for 1, but you can also trade it 2 for 1 sometimes if you're lucky. It's definitely got a higher, well, it doesn't have as high of a ceiling, probably on average in limited, as incremental growth. But in this format, I would argue that the floor is the most important thing. Just simply being able to cast this is a nice step above that growth. Alright, pack 4, pick 1 here. Still planning on being 5-color soup if possible. So, Azorius Guildmage. This card is pretty decent. It's a tapper effect. There's another one here in Minister of Impediments. One of the funny things about this format, how it differs from, again, traditional Chaos, is there aren't as many creatures with low toughness running around, which means partially maybe it's not as advantageous to run ways of punishing X1s like pingers, for example. But another thing is, one of the reasons that there might be fewer X1s running around is because you do have more effects that can deal with low toughness creatures in an efficient way, like we just picked up a sweeper in the previous pack. So yeah, we'll be fine taking a guild mage here over like the minister, whereas normally I think I'd be taking the minister if this were traditional Chaos. Once you get to like 6 mana, something like that, then this thing can really start shining. But there's also Azorius Signet in the pack, and normally my rule of thumb with packs like this in most formats is, like, if there's a bounce land, it's very often going to be one of the best picks, if not the best pick, and Signets are usually way overrated in my opinion, not particularly good. But in this format, mana fixing is so critical that I'm even willing to play a Signet, even though it's not my first choice. Alright, pack 5, pick 1. So in this one, this is where I'm starting to notice, I've picked up that green kind of sweeper effect. I've picked up that Naya kind of second version of a panorama. But maybe I'm just going to stick to some kind of Esper deck here. There's Recoil in this pack, which is not an amazing card, but it is fine. And there's Banalish Trapper, which, once again, I don't love tappers in the format. Like, tappers are not bad, but the problem is, like, they're very much like lightning rods for removal, and there are plenty of removal spells that can kill them. So it's better, in my opinion, to have, like, an actual Terminate or something which isn't disrupted as easily. Disrupting the opponent's disruption is a pretty powerful thing to do. Alright, pack 6, pick 1. Well, even though we're thinking about potentially going down some kind of Esper lane, there really isn't too much going on in this pack. There's Endless Horizons, which I had tried once before. This is a way to get card advantage, and that's pretty decent. The fact that it's 4 mana, kind of like suspend 1 before replacing itself with a plains, is not ideal. You don't really have to worry about this getting blown up, not too much, which is kind of nice, but overall it's pretty slow. I'm not sure how I feel about that. And otherwise there's Puncture Blast as a powerful effect, though currently looks like maybe an off-color one. Alright, here we are, pack 7, pick 1. So one of the cards in this pack is Firemane Angel, 6 mana 4/3 flyer with first strike. Some decent abilities there, but ultimately very slow. Not sure about the rate on this card. Whereas here we have Dimir Guildmage. We also have Lurking Informant. Dimir Guildmage, in my opinion, is one of the stronger 2-drops you could probably get in this format without it being like a bomb, just because you're able to kind of winnow the opponent's hand, but also accrue card advantage, like just fill your own hand over time, which is not the easiest thing to do in the format. This thing really demands an answer or some kind of massive board presence from the opponent, or it will take over the game. Similarly, Lurking Informant, there are a lot of bricks in this format. You're going to be playing a lot of lands, and just having a card like this can be really nice as a way to minimize your own bricks or kind of fate seal your opponent. There's also Vidalcan Dismisser in the pack, but as a 6-drop in this format, we're going to be looking for something a little bit better than a 2/2. Alright, pack 8, pick 1, and here was the real decision point. I'd already waffled a little bit by taking that Wither burn spell before, but now I have to choose. If I want to stay on the Esper route, there's Discovery Dispersal. I can run that and Notion Rain. Muse Drake is also in the pack, but I do have Vivid Revival here, and this card is pretty powerful in the format, I believe. And there's even a Golgari Guildgate, so we could potentially have the Vivid Revival and the fixing for it, or we could have Vivid Revival and our choice of Dimir Gold card that we could end up recurring with it. And so this was, definitely one of the harder picks of the draft. I had just witnessed kind of the power of, the 5-color soup decks over and over, and it seemed like by passing up Vivid Revival here, I would really be committing to some kind of Esper strategy. But I decided that I had seen some pretty powerful Esper decks, just like screenshots circulating Discords, things like that. And I wanted to see if I could get there with a 3-color deck, which is more of a mid-range strategy as opposed to, just the kind of super greedy control deck. So here we took that Discovery Dispersal plus Notion Rain. Alright, pack 9, pick 1. So here we have Soul Manipulation, excellent card. Excellent card in general, but especially in this format. Can be really backbreaking card advantage. Counter spells can be very nice to have in the format. There are not very many good ones, though. This is one of the only good ones. But there's also Behemoth Sledge. And this card is just so strong. But one of the weird things about this format is it is significantly weaker here. So having Equip 3 means that this thing is going to be fairly slow and clunky to use. And in a format where there are so many removal spells flying around, paying an extra 3 mana too many times without accomplishing anything could lose you a game. And the other thing is we really did just commit to not playing green or red. So as tempting as Behemoth Sledge is, I'm going to decide, well, maybe if I had some amazing token makers or something that I could use to repeatedly get value out of Behemoth Sledge, I would have strayed for this. But instead, we'll just take the Talon Trooper, which it's just a totally medium card. Not something I'm excited to run, but not unplayable either. Alright, pack 10, pick 1. Here we get rewarded, pretty excited about that, with a Magister Sphinx. I've never cast this card before, but it's a 7 mana 5/5 flyer, and I think maybe it's one of the Sorin abilities or something like that to make a player's life total 10. But the funny thing is you do have to choose. It's not up to 1 or you may or anything like that. So sometimes that means let's say your opponent's at I don't know, let's say your opponent is at 7 life or something, and you are at 15. Sometimes it'll be better to bring yourself down to 10 than to to bring your opponent back up to it. But this one out of the way. Otherwise, the pack is not particularly exciting. Volcanic Fallout is kind of interesting. The sweeper effects, when you can get them in the format, can be decent. But double red is absolutely not happening for us. So Instead, we're just going to take Esper Cormorants here. 4 mana for a 3/3 flyer. Very French vanilla, but the stats are good and decently better than Talon Trooper, I might add. Alright, pack 11, pick 1 here. So this was a tough one. Here we get to take Repel Intruders without too much consideration. This is another counterspell, and it comes with some value attached, so I like that a lot. I like the flexibility. It's not too restrictive in terms of colors required to cast it either. But otherwise for us, there's like Last Breath, which is, you know, not spectacular. Wanderbrine Root Cutters, also not great. And I believe I ended up taking Safehold Sentry here. This card is a pretty annoying 2-drop, so you can attack with it if you have 3 mana up and your opponent can't profitably block, if they have like a 2/2 of their own. But it gets better because if they have, you know, a 2/2 or something like that, they can't actually attack into you either, because that untap symbol is so broken and annoying that this thing can dominate combat more than you might expect. So those were my picks from this one. Alright, pack 12, pick 1, another Ravnica pack and another whiff on a bounce land, which is very unfortunate. Here we do get Blind Hunter, which is pretty nice, but at this point I'm worried about our fixing, or really lack thereof. And so I was already not thrilled to pick up that Azorius Signet, but at this point, another double on color Signet when we are short on fixing and very much committed to Esper seems like it has to be the right choice, so I'll be taking those cards out of this one. Alright, pack 13, pick 1. We do have a number of goodies here. Courier's Capsule, a solid way of attaining card advantage, though we do already have a few ways to obtain card advantage and to filter. Cloudheath Drake, not spectacular. Ranger of Eos, it's pretty interesting. Probably some crazy things you can do with it in this format, but it's really hard to say no to an Esper Panorama. How about the on-color Tri-Land for us? That seems just about perfect. And Oblivion Ring, so just classic, very nice removal spell. What more could you ask for? Alright, pack 14, pick 1. So we get another pack from Ravnica. This time it's the third coming of it. And we do get a land. We've been looking for lands, but we also have a number of medium cards in the pack. So Priest of Forgotten Gods. In some formats this card's very good, but you know, we've already talked about kind of the ability to have multiple creatures in play like this. Like, sacrifice 2 other creatures, is that really happening? I'm not sure about that. And that leaves us with some cards like Spirit of the Spires, which, you know, is fine. Slimebind, also fine, and Senate Griffin, which is just okay too. But here I ended up going with the Senate Griffin, decided I really liked kind of the castability, flexibility with the mana, and Scry 1 in this format is kind of a big deal, so that was my choice. Alright, pack 15, pick 1 here. So this one is more or less a whiff after taking Far and Away, and Far and Away is not exactly the best card ever. Sometimes you can use it effectively by using Far on yourself. You can like reset your ETBs, make enchantment removal fall off. But overall I just don't love this effect very much. The casting costs are a little bit clunky. That said, it's better than the rest of the stuff in the pack. I believe I ended up taking Maze Glider as my second card, though frankly maybe Simic Guildgate as an option to kind of backdoor into that Frenzy, -2/-2, Death Frenzy, could make more sense. Alright, pack 16, pick 1 here. So a lot of the time, these IPA packs are the absolute roughest. Fortunately for us, we do have a couple powerful Drakes. We have Hunting Drake, and Hunting Drake in an Esper deck is just the nuts. One of the things you have to worry about putting this card into your deck in this format, which is normally a 5-color format, you have to actually worry about it hitting your own stuff, kind of like that Magister Sphinx, sometimes having to hit your own life total. But playing 0 red or green creatures, suddenly that's not a concern anymore. There's also Silver Drake here, so don't love the idea of having to bounce something back to my hand. It's going to be pretty tough to have a creature in play let alone to like play this on curve, having like a 1 or 2 drop in play like before then. But you know, it's still a good rate, and our deck could end up in such a way that maybe that's playable. All right, pack 17, pick one. We got a couple bangers in this one. Starting off with Vindicate, so that's excellent, but one of the better old cards in the format is Phyrexian Gargantua. So 6 mana, 4/4, not exactly a super exciting body, but if you can play this thing, draw the 2 cards, lose the 2 life, and not be massively behind in terms of like life total or, you know, pressure from the opponent, you are very likely going to win that game. Like, just what would you call this? You would call this like a 2 for 0 or something, but regardless, this kind of card advantage is not easy to come by, and the thing is just super powerful. All right, pack 18, pick one. I think this was like one of the most questionable like choices I made in the pack, or in this draft. So you have Bane Alley Broker here, which is a looter, and I am pretty high on looters. I'm really not sure why I ended up deciding not to take this thing. I took Smite, which I do think is reasonable. Maybe not something you're looking to main deck, but I'm pretty sure my other selection should have been this Broker. Instead, I took Syndicate Enforcer, which it's not a terrible card, but I mean, come on. Looters in this format are just pretty nice. Alright, so with the draft out of the way, let's see some of the decisions we made here in deck building. So it looks like for now, just kind of figuring out the last few cards that we want to leave in the sideboard. Stuff like Talon Trooper, Syndicate Enforcer, Safehold Sentry. All that stuff I'm content to leave in the sideboard. Note that Cormorants does make it in over the Talon Trooper as just something that hits a little harder, has a little bit bigger of an impact on the game. I don't want that Silver Drake in the main deck. Smite seems like a reasonable option for the sideboard. We do have both those signets that I was talking about in terms of mana fixing. We also have 1 Guild Gate, 1 Panorama, and 1 fetch land, with no fetchable duels, of course. So at this point, I'm just going to be trying to figure out the mana base. The mana bases in this format, it's funny because on the one hand, like, I think it's really good practice with a mana base to play a lot of this format, because they do force you to make such difficult decisions in terms of how many basics you want to run, that kind of thing. On the other hand, having to do that every single time you draft is just really exhausting. One of the things about Supreme is because it's like a solo draft experience, air quotes around that, you can just fire these off pretty quickly. Like, there's no waiting time in the queue, for instance, for the draft to fire. So with that, yeah, we've got our deck here. Got Magister Sphinx and Phyrexian Gargantua as our curve toppers. Good amount of fixing, interaction, flyers, stuff like that. Alright, so here we are for round 1. Note that the opponent is on 54 cards in library, and they are 2-0, which is certainly an accomplishment in this format. It's really hard to like even get enough fixing and playables in this format, assuming you're playing 5-color. Like, it's not something you should expect not to be able to succeed at, but it's more like you're going to have like 2 cards left in your sideboard or something if you draft, you know, a ton of lands and pretty much just the good spells. So we start here with an early Mind Rot without a way to affect the board. Opponent's just playing some kind of clunky mana rocks. I like that for me. We choose to scry the Polluted Delta to the top. We do have that Phyrexian Gargantua waiting in the wings here, so it's going to be important to have double black. We don't actually want to crack the Delta. Remember, we don't have any fetchable duels, so nothing's coming in untapped. And if possible, we do want to draw 1 more land, and by not cracking the Delta, we increase our chances of doing so. So, opponent's just playing some kind of unremarkable removal spells at this point. Not too much to say about all that. They do have Sen's Enlistment in their graveyard, which, you know, at some point could do something annoying, but I don't think that's very likely to end up bothering us. And we do spike the land, so that's very nice for us. Now we get to fetch up that swamp, drop the Gargantua into play. We're not attacking this turn, but We are now just cruising here. We have Soul Manip. We have the Hunting Drake, and the opponent is playing both red and green, so fairly likely that we're going to find a target for this thing at some point. They now play Agoraphobia on the Gargantua, and they play that Sen's Enlistment. But now they've tapped out a blue, which means they can't return Agoraphobia to hand, so this is a perfect opportunity for me to get rid of that thing and give myself another threat here. Now I get to start crunching in with the Gargantua. For some reason, opponent chooses to chump with a 1-1 rather than like just making, another couple 1-1s. Oh yeah, and then here we get the Soul Manip on the Borborygmos, and that's pretty much all she wrote. I think, yeah, we even get the pre-combat Magister Sphinx here, bring the opponent from 16 down to 10 and attack for 6. Now you're probably wanting to jump, but the opponent doesn't. So interesting choices there, and yeah, just like that, we are up a game. So again, not sure how the opponent got to 2-0 on 54 cards. Like, that is just some absolute craziness. But just a very smooth draw from our deck. Things are looking good. Alright, so we just end up running it back here. The opponent puts me on the play, which I do not think you are supposed to do in this format. I do love old formats, and I do love choosing to take the draw, but one of the things with this format is it's so important to hit land drops, and bounce lands are so powerful, and they're also such a punish to drawing first. So at this point we just get to develop our Dimir Guildmage, and then I think, yeah, we just drop the Sky Knight here. And, like I mentioned before, the opponent doesn't even have any non-land permanents there. They play Fight Rigging, which is potentially pretty scary. That said, I do have Vindicate right here, so I decide, what if I just don't have to worry about that thing pumping anything later? What if I just blow that up, attack for 5? There's an argument for blowing up the land, but it's very likely more where that came from, so I don't love that play. Opponent does have Bog down here, but I do have 5 power in play, and they're at 14. We choose to keep the Magister Sphinx, the idea being that we have Dimir Guildmage to draw cards, which makes it more likely that we're going to be able to get to 7 mana. Though I'm not sure that was the correct play necessarily. At this point we just get to attack with both and develop the Cormorants, or wait, no, I guess not. Yeah, so at this point I'll just draw a card instead. One of the things going on here is trying to play around a sweeper with them at 5 life. If they just like kill one thing like this, I'm pretty happy to like hit them to 2. Now develop the Cormorants. Even if they have a sweeper, I get to play Guildmage plus Trapper. Yeah, the opponent just gains some life. So we do sort of get punished for not being super aggressive here and just going for the kill immediately, but the opponent's just gonna, they're just gonna need something they don't have there. So we are able to get away with their first match win here. Alright, so here we are for round 2. We are going to choose to play first here, but sadly we get this 1 land hand with the Signet, which is simply not keepable. We do get to throw back a Hunting Drake here though, which is nice. We get to develop our Guildmage on 2. I don't think I'm going to be holding up Soul Manip turn 3 or anything like that. Yeah, I think I just have no intentions of doing that. And the nice thing about having the Signet here is it does turn on white mana for us, also turns on double blue for whatever that's worth. If we had played the Signet last turn, we could have played the Cormorants this turn, but we didn't know that was on top of the library, so not too upset with the way we chose to play that here. This time we are going to just drop the Cormorants into play past the turn. Putrid Leech is going to end up being a problem for us. Just a 2-drop that can hit you for 4 a few times is very annoying. The opponent has Keening Banshee, which is pretty nice. And we do have Polluted Delta here. I believe I'm just passing the turn at this point, planning to use that Soul Manip to get back the Dimir Guildmage, and leaving the Cormorants back so the Keening Banshee doesn't hit us. It's not like we're racing Putrid Leech anyway, so. Opponent just hits us for the 2 rather than the 4, but they do go for a Frenzied Erranx here, which I'm thrilled about, so I'll get to counter that, get my Guildmage back. I believe I should have fetched here. It looks like I didn't. I don't think it's a huge deal or anything like that. but I do think it's probably better to have fetched. Okay, so now, yeah, looks like we go for the Notion Rain. Ooh, and we find the Larcenist. I believe that I did not keep Repel Intruders. I imagine I kept Larcenist, and then... Okay. Interesting. So, yeah, we're now set up next turn to be able to cast Larcenist. We're still a ways off of the Magister Sphinx, unfortunately. And at this point, we have 4 white cards in hand, only 1 white mana source, so we are pretty choked on white. If we top deck Plains, or something like that, some kind of untapped white source, then that could be very exciting for us. No idea what's going on at this point. The opponent, just going for their Putrid Leech attack. I'm all the way down to 9. They're at 16. Everything's fine, I'm sure. Double blocking, unfortunately, could very easily have lost me the game, so that was not an option, I don't think. Gotta reread Burning Tree Shaman, see if I take damage from the Signet. Looks like I don't. And here we see a terrifying hand. So they have Disembowel, Puncture Blast, Urborg Uprising, Zertos Swine, and Woodfall Primus. Fortunately, I don't much have to worry about that Woodfall Primus, but I'm at 9 life. So that means if I don't block Putrid Leech and I don't have any instant speed interaction, they can just pay 2 life, Blood Rush that Zertos Swine, and I just lose the game on the spot. So really wishing I could take that one here, but sadly that's not how Larcenist works. Instead, I do eventually end up choosing to take Puncture Blast, which, is brutal because it's an efficient removal spell that can end up 2-for-1ing me if I double block, but also just burn me out if I get careless and take too much damage. So I'm now in a very difficult spot. I'm going to be casting one of the white removal spells in my hand. I don't remember what I cast it on, let alone which one I cast. So there's no argument for hitting their mountain, unfortunately, even with Quirion Elves on black, because sadly Prophetic Prism still gives them red mana for the Zertos Swine. We do take the 3/4 off the table, though. And so yeah, there I'm mousing over that Zertos Swine, saying like, hey, like I'm dead if this thing comes in. So here I just go for the double block with my 2 smaller creatures, kind of saying like the opponent can have their 2-for-1 whatever way they want it, so they just pay the 2 life, which is the easiest way to do it. They could have also disemboweled, they could have also used the Zertos Swine, so, just kind of have to sign myself up for the bad beat there. But we find the land, and so now this puts us into really good shape, because if the opponent had used like Disembowel, for instance, which leaves the Putrid Leech alive, then they would still have the Leech in play, and they would have that Zertos Swine. In other words, I would be potentially taking lethal damage if they had spent the Disembowel. But now, Disembowel does not very easily answer this Magister Sphinx. Opponent's down to 7 life. They go for this attack. It's just an attack for 2. I know they have 5 damage in hand with the Zertos Swine, but if they just hit me down to 2, they're just going to lose, because I have 8 damage on the Crackback. And so now I have this Vindicate here. Like, I'm not going to say we're sitting pretty, but yeah, there we go. So Disembowel is going to target the Cormorants, and now we pretty much have this one locked up. We know their hand. They spent the Disembowel. We get to Hunting Drake, which means we now know what they're drawing, and the only thing we have to do here is block if they go to attack with that Keening Banshee, given that they do have Zertos Swine in hand, and that, the only way we lose at this point is by just taking lethal damage, which is not something I plan on doing here. If they just leave the Keening Banshee back, then, we're happy to vindicate that and just force through lethal, but regardless, we have somehow managed to find ourselves in this awesome position where it seemed like we were absolutely dead no matter what we did with the Larcenist, and then I think basically like the opponent couldn't have known necessarily that like what they were doing was going to be like a massive throw, but I think choosing to pay the life with the Putrid Leech instead of doing that and casting the Disembowel ended up costing them in a pretty big way. Alright, so this one we are going to keep. We have blue and black mana. We do find the white source off the top. I should be fetching here as soon as possible, yet for that island. Opponent has Transguild Promenade, and that is one of the stronger like ways you can fix your mana in this format. It's like anytime you can get that, or the many equivalents of that same effect, they're super high picks. So we get to lead things off here with a Nimble Larcenist, taking the opponent's Savage Twister, so very happy to get rid of that. We still have a Tapper for their 3-4 that's in play. We have a Vindicate if we need to use that as well. Fine taking the first 3 damage here, though. It's not too concerning. But the opponent does deploy a couple cheap creatures, the Drudge Beetle and the Thunderscape Apprentice. So, you know, at some point we are going to need to figure out how to answer that stuff. I believe here I just ended up vindicating the 3-4 and then attacking for 2 in the air. Unfortunately, unfortunate that we don't have double white available, so we could Vindicate plus use that tap ability, but, you know, gotta make do with what is available. And still happy to get that Burning Tree Shaman off the board. And the opponent has Branching Bolt here, which they either drew this turn or the previous turn, I think. And that is just absolutely brutal for me. So Branching Bolt, super busted card in the format, as a removal spell that often kills 2 things, and unlike something like Magma Burst, you don't even need to like sacrifice a couple lands to do it. Opponent gonna ping me with the Apprentice. Now there's, you know, a Drudge Beetle that I pretty much have to deal with. I'm already down to 13 life. Decide that I'm just gonna end up blocking here, even though I really don't love that as an option for me. The opponent just gets to trade, you know, their 2-2 with a graveyard ability versus my 3-2 flyer, which just feels horrible for me. But I need to stem the bleeding if I can. Need to try to put some pressure on the opponent. Opponent now has a couple 1/1s in play, but like I mentioned, they do have that ability on the Drudge Beetle in the graveyard. They're going to pump up the Druid, which I don't think was the correct choice. I think it's just better to hit the Thunderscape Apprentice, because then you get to attack right away. I believe that was my reasoning, at least, for questioning that from them, but maybe they wanted to be able to pump the Zerta Druid if that thing attacked, so like turn it into a 4-4, for example. Oh, okay, and then yeah, I think here they do actually have that Magma Burst, don't they? Just the way they tap 4 mana and then they're paying costs for so long. So yeah, goodbye. It's now time to haunt the most threatening creature over there with the Blind Hunter. We are down to 10 and suddenly losing this race pretty badly. So one of the funny things is Dispersal, the 5 mana second half of Discovery, does return the most expensive card opponent controls to hand, or non-land permanent, I guess. And that does hit the 2-drop that has the counters on it, so it's a punish for them putting the counters on it, and also a punish for me haunting. Though more realistically, like, I should have been able to, or maybe not should have, but I might have been able to foresee that you know, I would just end up bouncing that guy. Here we're just going to surveil 2 things into the graveyard. Now sadly we're at 7 life. Even if we didn't, you know, play that and surveil 2 things into the graveyard, like, our draw steps would have just been absolute bricks. I thought I had a decent shot here with the opponent on so few lands, but they're doing a decent job rebuilding. And yeah, what's worse for me is, even if I'm able to stabilize the board with like a 2-3 flyer, well, I guess it would have to be a 3-4 flyer, the opponent can just double ping me to death because they have the Thunderscape plus the Zerta Druid. And yeah, at this point, I mean, my only real hope is they cast some huge thing into my Repel Intruders. But all they have to do is attack, and that'll do it, because once they tap the Zerta Druid and the Thunderscape, I am dead. So, a nice close match so far. I thought I was pretty dead in game 1, and then game 2, after I played that Larcenist, I just thought it would be smooth sailing, but instead we ran into the 2 burn spells from the opponent, Branching Bolt and Magma Burst, and you know, that just kind of spelled disaster for us. We chose to lead on Island there because we had the natural Tron, and we do have Azorius Guildmage in deck, and so in theory we could draw that instead and end up wanting to play that on turn 2. Oh yeah, and then here we find the Gargantua, but we don't have double black, so we are going to bin that island, top the Gargantua, and just pass the turn. And although Dimir Guildmage is quite a bit better than Drudge Beetle, and we don't want to trade off the Guildmage, we also don't want to keep losing life willy-nilly. We have stuff to do for the next, like for the foreseeable future with our mana here. And fortunately we do find double black now, so rewarded for binning that island. This time we just get to top swamp. We would have topped any land there, because now this means that Gargantua is coming on curve. So now we get to go ahead and attack, and we have a nice trick here with the Discovery Dispersal, so the opponent has a haste creature that's going to get bounced by the Dispersal, so all we have to do is go to beginning of combat, and they're not going to be able to replay that to good effect here. So yeah, kind of an annoying one for them, presumably, but they do discard that Frenzied Airynx, which kind of spelled trouble for me. I wasn't really sure like why they would discard that, but then once they had the Urborg Uprising, suddenly it all made sense. But Urborg Uprising, you know, a 3-for-1 that doesn't exactly add to the board, whereas Phyrexian Gargantua, I now have a 4-4 on the battlefield in addition to my 3-2 flyer. I have Magister Sphinx once again waiting in the wings. And yeah, the opponent just has this Zerta Druid. Once again, I get to pre-combat the Magister Sphinx, and I believe the opponent is just absolutely forced to trade with the Gargantua here, and this is an excellent trade for me. I don't have to worry about taking a bunch of damage from the 5-4 somehow, and the opponent, their life total is dropping quickly. So they're now down to 8, facing 8 power of flyers from me. I don't have too much gas left in the tank here. Lurking Informant to just filter my draws a little bit. The opponent does have Keening Banshee, though. Keening Banshee to kill my 2-2 flyer. So I believe, yeah, now the plan is just attack with that Magister Sphinx. We'll see whether the opponent chumps or not. Eventually. And interestingly, the opponent just takes the damage after tanking for a while. We're just going to run out Lurking Informant. We can crack the Panorama, and we still have mana up for Soul Manip. One of the options available to us was just play Soul Manip as Raised Dead and like get back the 3-2 flyer last turn, but one of the reasons we didn't do that was because we really want to get full value out of the Soul Manip / prevent the opponent from adding something impactful to the board. I realized here, it took me a while, but I kind of deduced that like I didn't think this Drudge Beetle was a bait, the way a lot of the time someone will cast a weaker spell into a counter to try to bait out the counter and resolve something more important. It just, like, given that the Keening Banshee stayed back, it seems like the opponent has like some kind of trick, like some kind of burn spell, and we did see a couple here, and the one that makes sense for 3 mana is going to be Branching Bolt. So let's see what I did here. Looks like I probably just ran out this Gargantua. Yeah, second time. Oh yeah, and now we get to just Larcenist and kind of know exactly what's going on with the opponent here. Okay, and then, so this is an interesting one. So I chose to take the Sweeper, the Savage Twister, because if I choose to take the Branching Bolt and then go for the attack, the opponent just chumps, and then they play Savage Twister X's 5, and I lose everything. So it's actually imperative that I take Savage Twister. And I don't want to attack because I'm enabling Branching Bolt to trade for, plus Keening Banshee to trade for the Sphinx, plus my Lurking Informant. I do have that upkeep stop on for myself just in case I end up wanting to surveil before my draw step. So opponent goes for Branching Bolts on my creatures, each one with more than 3 toughness, so presumably Magma Burst is coming to finish them off, and it sure does. But the opponent is now at 3 life. I have a Blind Hunter in hand, and we get to see the rare lethal attack with the Lurking Informant here to bring us into the finals. Really nice close match there. Very interesting decision points. Alright, and here we are for the finals. So we're up against another 2-0 player, and this time we are on the draw and we have a mulligan. So 3 strikes against us before the game even starts. Do not love that. Here I'm considering bottoming that Lurking Informant and eventually decide Azorius Guildmage can go instead. That Informant could be the reason I end up hitting white mana eventually. Decide not to fetch right away. This deck does like to hit its land drops, and even though fetching does technically increase my chances of like hitting a white source, I just decide that it's not something that I need to do from turn 1. I get to make a more informed decision with my fetch land later if I choose to wait. Alright, so at this point we get to just run out the Guildmage, see if we're going to be able to get any damage in with that one, but sadly the opponent has the, absolutely no chill terminate there. And they have Telling Time, and they have Orzhov Basilica, so already there are some questions of like, is the opponent running 4 colors? We do end up just choosing to recoil that Basilica. It seemed like a really important thing to do to try to set them back, given that, we are on a mulligan and on the draw, so kind of doubly disadvantaged there. Here, yeah, so okay, the opponent goes for Mortify. I do crack this here to find double black, which I think is correct at that point. Now I get to Discovery and bin 2 lands and find a Blind Hunter, so we're looking at 4 Dimir lands and 4 white cards in hand. Not a great place to be, but we top deck the plains here, and we get a Larcenist into play, and it is huge. So the opponent has a Flame Jab, Psychic Spiral, and Thought Collapse. We get to take the Flame Jab, which gets exiled, which means that the 2 swamps in hand are of no use. So they're not casting that Thought Collapse. And yeah, so now, yeah, it looks like we just run out the creature with greater power here, which is like exactly what you're supposed to do, in my opinion. It does die to a top-decked Douse and Gloom, no problems there though. And now look at this, the opponent doesn't have double blue for the Thought Collapse. We get to resolve the Gargantua, one of the most impactful cards in our deck. This time the opponent does have double blue. And they play a Hunting Drake, which, sadly versus my Esper deck is just not going to cut it. We get to go ahead and make this attack with the Gargantua. Now we get to resolve this Blind Hunter post-combat, and speaking of resolving things, it occurs to me that I could disrupt the Hunting Drake, but what if I blow up the land instead? What if I take my opponent's Guildgate off the table? Not their bounce land, but their Guildgate. Because now Thought Collapse as a double blue counterspell isn't going to be able to do anything. And so now we get to resolve O-Ring, no concerns of the opponent having mana available for the Thought Collapse. Attack for 6, we have Repel Intruders here, so the opponent kills the Blind Hunter. Not a big deal, they only take 1 damage from the Gargantua. It's a little bit annoying. And they go for Devour Flesh, which would trigger our Haunt, but instead, at this point we've seen 0 creatures from the opponent. We just get to run out Repel Intruders. And although we don't get to counter the Devour Flesh, we nearly counter it because it's an Edict and we're just putting basically a Raise the Alarm into play. So we sack a 1/1, hit the opponent from 15 to 10. The opponent has a Nivix Guildmage, and we top deck Azorius Guildmage, that same card we put to the bottom of our library at the start of the game. And look at this, the opponent does not have enough cards with the Psychic Spiral to mill us out, which was a big concern. We get to activate that Guildmage right away, tap the opponent's blocker, hit them for 5, setting up for lethal next turn. And that Guildmage doesn't just have a tap ability, it also has a counter target activated ability. So we get to Guildmage your Guildmage, and that is it. So really sweet game where our cards just lined up perfectly. That Vindicate on the Dimir Guildgate to turn off the opponent's Thought Collapse was absolutely clutch. And yeah. One of the reasons that Thought Collapse would have been such a problem, by the way, is, with the opponent presumably trying to mill me out with Psychic Spiral, Thought Collapse milling me for 3 cards, is not irrelevant. That kind of incidental mill could be the difference between decking out in that game. Alright, so here we are for that final game. Once again, playing against a 2-0 and on the draw. This time, though, it looks like we've got a keeper, which does make things easier for us. We also have a lot more information about the opponent's deck, so that's beneficial for us as well. For instance, we know that Soul Manipulation does not have very many hits in the matchup. That means that we might end up using it as a raise dead, and we're not going to waste too much time trying to make that decision, whereas game 1, before seeing a near creatureless deck from them, we likely would have gone back and forth on that. Alright, so here, we don't need an extra plains. I believe, yeah, I do end up topping this Cormorants. Unfortunate that we're missing black mana at this point. Even if Soul Manip is not going to be great here, the Notion Rain would be pretty nice. But that's not too big of a concern. We get to run out the Cormorants now. It does block the Nivix Guildmage, but the opponent goes for an extremely weird one here. So the opponent goes Armillary Sphere for lands, and now they go triple Flame Jab your Cormorants, and attack with the Nivix Guildmage. So not exactly complaining about that one. If anything, I'm just kind of confused. Now I get to run out Senate Griffin. We do find Repel Intruders. I believe I kept that one on top. The idea being that, this turn I can develop the Panorama. Next turn I can play a land. Yep, there goes the Senate Griffin. Now I can play a land, play my 4 mana, raise the alarm, trade for the opponent's Nivix Guildmage, which is getting a little bit annoying here, and still have the ability to turn on black mana with that Panorama. And sure enough, the opponent does just keep looting with that Guildmage. But, yeah, here we go. Nice Repel Intruders here to double block this thing. And if the opponent has a removal spell, it's totally fine with me. Looks like instead they're just going to end up looting with it. And we get to crack the Panorama, grab a Swamp. And I believe we just fire off that Notion Rain right away. And the opponent has 3 cards in hand. We don't have an untapped black source, but that is a great reason to keep Orzhov Signet on top of the library. You can see me scroll up there in the game log, check and see whether I played a land for turn. I had not, and that means that I can play land, play the Signet, and play the Mind Rot, take the opponent down to 1 card, then quickly draw back up to 2. And yeah, at this point, playing the Informant, checking out my graveyard in case the Soul Manip is going to be like a better option this turn or something like that. Looks like the opponent has some kind of like big X spell or something like that, but I guess they choose not to use it. They're going to use it on their turn instead. Oh, Resounding Wave. And it's at this point that I decide, I just want to have, threats consistently to apply pressure. So I'll just go ahead and pick up that Senate Griffin, picking it up over the Cormorants because of that Scry 1 value here, deciding that I'm not very likely to counter a creature with that, and that I just want to be able to double spell on this coming turn. So the Informant hits the board, and so does the Senate Griffin, which finds a Gargantua. We're not going to be surveilling one on upkeep, knowing that one's there. So the opponent goes for a Worldly Council at this point. And there's a Scepter of Fugue and a Faith's Fetters. So interestingly, I think the opponent was like a black source short there or something of activating the Scepter of Fugue, which is a great card name, by the way. And I think here I just chose to go for the O-Ring on the Scepter, pretty much thinking that, it was going to be annoying one way or another no matter what. And by answering it now, I don't have to worry about it later or play around it. Pretty sure I was supposed to just play that Polluted Delta and fetch right there instead of playing the basic, but it doesn't change a whole lot. I think the reason I didn't do that is because I was afraid of Psychic Spiral. Yeah, I was like, oh no, the opponent's going to mill me. Anyway, here, once again, we've just seen almost no creatures from the opponent. So we're going to spend Far and Away as just something to reset my Lurking Informant. Now we're trying to come in as fast as possible. We have our 1/2s on aggro duty here. The opponent does have one other creature in the 3/1. This time we get to jam this Magister Sphinx. As always, pre-combat here, bring the opponent down to 10, tap their 3/1, hit them for 8 damage, down to 2 life, and just about secure a kill here. If they have the Psychic Spiral, we are dead, but looks like they're just passing the turn. They're attacking, so basically if I block, then they get some extra looks, I think, at the Spiral, and we don't block. And that's that. So thank you everyone for watching. That was our trophy with the awesome Esper deck in this Supreme Gold format. Just a little bit of evidence, contrary to my hypothesis, that you really needed to be some kind of 5-color soup deck to succeed. And yeah, hope you have enjoyed watching. We'll see you next time.